First of all, I'm not a professor. Wouldn't claim to be, have any knowledge at all. I'm extraordinarily moved and honored to be with an audience of like-minded people, all on the same purpose. The last time I had an opportunity to address a large group was a gathering of partners in Price Waterhouse who didn't have a clue what I was talking about. And I imagine that this will be a little easier. I would like to address the first question that was asked, how did I get to this path? And my path started 67 years ago in Indonesia, in a concentration camp, where I spent 3.5 years with my mother and brother. And after that, I spent some time in Indonesia in a war-torn country, and then was sent off to a foster home. And after the foster home, I finally reunited with my family. And by that time, I was 10 years old and had developed an enormous amount of anger, cynicism, mistrust, deep hatred of myself, which, of course, I projected on everyone and everything around me. Nonetheless, I immediately, at age 12, started reading whatever I could read to find out who I was. So I was reading Schopenhauer and Nietzsche and Sartre and Camus, and anybody that could tell me, who the hell am I? And there was no answer. I couldn't find the answer in any of the books. The books told me a lot of wonderful information, and all of it made sense, but none of it could get to me, who am I? And then there was a time when I was 17, I woke up in the middle of the night with an unspeakable feeling of peace and love. And I jumped out of bed and I said, I know the answer. I've got the answer. And the answer is, there is no question. And then I said, okay, I want to see what that looks like, because I now feel it, I know it's true. What does it look like? So I jumped back into bed and went back into that state. And what it was absolutely crystal clear blackness. So I knew at that age the truth. I know who I am. Unfortunately, in my culture at that point, there was nobody I could share this experience with. Nobody would even understand what I went through, and I sure as hell did not understand what I went through. So how did I respond to this particular experience? I responded by deciding that I would never think again, because this was clearly leading to insanity at a very rapid pace, and that I would solve my problems henceforth with drugs and alcohol. And so I had then a lengthy career of about 45 years of drinking, doing any drug I could get my hands on, always with a dual purpose. And the dual purpose, one, was to kill the self that I hated. But underneath that was another purpose which I was vaguely aware of, but not consciously aware of, and that was to go back to the truth of who I am. I was just looking in the wrong place. It is not in booze and it's not in drugs. But I thought maybe it was going to be there because it wasn't anywhere else. I didn't know of Stan Grof. And then there came a time about 14, 15 years ago where I decided that either I was going to commit suicide because my life was unbearable, or there had to be another way. And the line that there had to be another way just stuck in my mind. And somebody gave me A Course in Miracles, and I opened the Course in Miracles, and the first line I read was this: sin is lack of love, as darkness is lack of light. And I said, holy shit, I've always known that. That is true. Well, the next line started talking about Jesus and the Holy Spirit and the Father, and I said, nah, this is not for me. It took me another 2.5 years to go back to the Course. And then the Course started talking to me about truth. And I didn't see those words anymore. I didn't see the word God that I objected so much to. I didn't see the word Jesus. I didn't see the word Christ. I didn't see the word Mother or Father. I didn't see any of that language. All I saw and all I read was a very, very straight line to the truth. Sin is lack of love. This brings me back to what Serge was talking about earlier. And by God, that is true. Sin is lack of love. It's nothing else. And all we have to do is recognize that a George Bush or a Saddam Hussein or a Hitler are just crying for love. And all I have to do is give love to the George Bush and the Saddam Hussein and the Hitler within me. That's all I have to do. I don't have to do anything else. I don't have to participate in protests or marches or anything else. I have to extend love to the relationships that I'm in. That's my job. And it's the only job I have, thank God. Because nothing else I know anything about. There's a great, great prayer from St. Catherine of Siena, and there's so many Italians in here, I feel embarrassed to bring it up, of around 1340, I believe. And she starts the prayer by saying, I talk to him about it sometimes. All the horror that I've seen, all the pain, all the suffering. And I ask him, isn't there something you can do about this? And God answers. And God says, yeah, you have no idea how it pains me to see all this happening, but you have no idea how much more it would pain me to interfere. And then he ends the prayer. God answers, she reports that he ends the prayer by saying, at the end, the infinite and absolute innocence of all within my creation will become clear. It would take a little while to understand that. And that was 700 years ago, or 800 years ago almost, and God, it takes a little while to understand. But I think if we can make a commitment, if I can continue making my commitment to refuse to acknowledge evil as something outside of me, and to take it back, and take it back, and take it back, and say, is that who I am? Is that truly who George Bush is? And I know that George Bush has been a challenge for several people here, and I used to watch TV in the old days when I still had TV, and I couldn't even watch him till I healed that part within me that was George Bush. That lying, hypocritical, insecure, nabbish person who just hated himself and who came to this huge, powerful position, still hating himself. And he had no choice but to do what he did. All he was doing is projecting his self-hatred. And that's all I was doing. And I still do it. And my job is to create an environment around myself where people call me on it. Where people say, that's not who you are. What you're believing right now is not true. What you're believing right now is not true. And whenever somebody says that to me, I sigh a deep sigh of relief and say, thank God that is true. What I'm believing right now is not true. The truth of me is not open to belief. What's open to belief is all the crap I made up. And I made up a lot of crap. And I'm shoveling every day. And the work we do at the center, I want to share with Stan Groff what an incredible role your work has played. It was about 15 or 14 years ago when whenever the subject of the concentration camps came up, I couldn't talk about it. And I couldn't figure out why. I was 3.5 when I came out, big deal. Everything is fine. I've forgiven the Japanese. I've forgiven everybody else. I'm a very noble person. I love everybody. But I could never talk about it. And then somebody suggests, why don't you do a holotropic breathing? I said, okay, I've done it before, and I'll do anything with the drugs, breathing, whatever. I'll try this one too. So I started the breathing, and I was assisted by 2 people. And for the first 10 minutes or so, I said, this is a total waste of time. Why don't you just give me some acid, which I'm used to taking, and we'll get much further, much quicker. But the people said, just keep breathing, just keep breathing. So I kept breathing. And then somebody, one of the 2 assistants, said something, whispered it in my ear, and he said, you're just a dirty little boy. And I just exploded in this huge agony of self-hatred and rage. And what I realized at that moment was that all the suffering and all the pain and all the torture and death and disease that I'd seen for 3.5 years as a tiny thing to this tall was my fault. I'd caused it all. Not only that, I had caused all the camps in the world. Not only that, but I was responsible for the entire Second World War. And that was where my guilt lay. That's what I've been walking around with. And if some psychologist or psychiatrist told me, I know what your problem is, you think you're responsible for the camps, I would say, you're nuts. That's insane. But this process brought that out. And if it wasn't for that process, I'd still be walking around with it. Because there's no way that cognitively you can get there. You can't talk about this. I had to experience it. I had to experience the immense pain that came from that level of guilt. And it's gone. And now when my voice breaks when I talk about it, it's because I love it. I love this work. I love the war. I love the camps we were in. I love the Japanese. I love Hitler. I love every part of me. The part that's true, I don't have to worry about, because that always continues. It just waits for me to smile once in a while and say, yeah, I know what's true. And the other parts I have to bring up. And I have to bring it up with compassion. I have to bring it up with understanding and love and with certainty that it is not who I am. And it's not who George Bush is. And it's not who any of the other people that we call evil. It's not who they are. They're innocent children of God. And so are we. And so am I. And thank God that is the truth. Thank you.
Grazie professor Wolsak. Personalmente sono molto colpita dalla sua presentazione e dalle sue parole e sono anche un po' emozionata, per cui passo subito la parola alla platea se c'è qualcuno che vuole porle delle domande prima di concludere questa intensa sessione. Le pongo allora... ok, perfetto. C'è.
Thank you very much for this, for the talk. I am very, very moved by the personal stories that these prominent men shared with us. Thank you. But the question that I have is kind of on a very practical level, and it relates to the beginning of your talk when you said that you are in this audience and it's going to be different because we're going to understand, unlike the talk that you had somewhere else and they didn't know what you were talking about. So the practical question is about how do you deal with that? How do you try to bridge your message, what you have to say to the people who don't understand? Thank you.
That's a wonderful question, and I only told part of the story. At the end of my talk in Toronto, the number 4 globally for Pricewaterhouse came up to me and said, this is incredible, this is what they need to hear, and if you get a 10% approval rating, it will have been a huge success. I spoke exactly the same way I did today. I got a 94% approval rating. The fact is that this is what is true. Whether I'm a chemist, whether I'm a policeman, whether I'm an accountant, whether I'm a transpersonal psychologist, makes no difference. The truth is true, and the truth will always be understood. And my challenge in the idea of speaking to this group was, am I going to change my message? Am I going to start talking about percentages and bottom lines and profit curves? No, I'm going to say exactly the same thing. And the amazing thing was that it was totally received. as it will always be received. So I would encourage everybody to just speak from your heart. It doesn't matter who you're talking to. And we do that at our center, where we work with people with depression and anxiety, all kinds of chemical addictions. Lately, more the legal chemical addictions, which, as people from North America know, is an epidemic. The work is the same. It all goes back to who are you? And who you truly are has never changed. Who you truly are is not affected by what you've done, what you've said. It doesn't make any difference. What you've studied, it makes no difference. Who you are is intrinsically whole. And that's the message. And so when we work with people with all these addictions, whether they're legal or illegal, we go back to the self you made up. It's just a bunch of beliefs. That's all. If I look around the room, there's a lot of beliefs in this room. They work beautifully for them. Keep them for now. People that we got at the center are almost always at a life and death situation. You can understand if you travel all the way to Costa Rica to come to a healing center, it's not an easy decision to make. So the people we got are high crisis level. Either they make it or they're going to die. So they're motivated. And the motivation, of course, why am I attracting those people? Because that's my journey. That's why they're coming to our center. All the centers have other attractions. But the people we attract are life and death cases, and we teach exactly the same thing. Start accessing, and then you mentioned meditation, which is an enormous part of our practice. Start accessing the truth within you. We do the breathings 2 or 3 times a week, and sometimes when new people come, we do them every day. Start accessing the truth within you. And from our experience, it doesn't take very long at all for the first glimmers to start showing in the light, in the eyes. When the eyes start, suddenly there's a little flicker, and you say, okay, you're getting it. It's beginning to come in. And that little flicker just expands. And before you know, before a week or 2 has passed, people sitting there with a huge smile on their face because they're finally connecting to the truth. And these are people that were suicidal, hopelessly depressed. I mean, we got people that are on 10, 15 different medications. And their psychiatrist had told them, if you ever go off any of this, you'll die. And we say, bullshit. Let's look at it. You have a great line. The only experience I had of you was on YouTube, where you said this great thing that the difference between a mystic and a psychiatrist. A mystic does not talk to his psychiatrist. A mystic and a psychotic, schizophrenia, yeah. So the difference between a mystic and a schizophrenic is a mystic does not talk to his psychiatrist. So talk about the stuff. Talk about the evil within. Bring it up. There's so much evil within me. And if I can bring it up, and if I can share it with all of you here, you'll all start to smile. Stephen Levine had a great little thing. He said, if we all put on a hat, and the minute we put on that hat, we can all see each other's thoughts, what would be the outcome? Love. Because we all have the same torture chamber. We all have the pornographic movie going on. We all have the lust and the greed and the hatred and the love. And if we can just bring it out, put it on the table, say, this is what I'm thinking right now. And everybody here would say, oh, isn't that cute? He's being his 4-year-old again. He's back into his hatred. And it's gone. But you have to bring it up. And if you don't look at it, as Serge was saying, if you don't bring it up, it's going to run the show. It will run the show forever. So I have to look at my stuff, and the practical application of this work is so breathtakingly wonderful. And I think it was Judith this morning that said it is easy. And I always say it's unbelievably easy. How hard is it to change my mind? There's nobody else in there. How hard can it be? What do I want to be true? Do I want love to be the truth, or do I want fear to be the truth? Well, fear can never be the truth, so it's an easy choice. Does that answer your question a little bit?
Posso dire, può dire 2 parole su le sue guide spirituali? Ha avuto dei mentori mentoring. Can you say some words about your spiritual guides and mentors you have had in your walking around?
Professor Groff voleva dire.
This was for me? Let me just first say what I wanted to say, which is I feel just deep appreciation for your openness, willingness to share such very personal stories. You know, most of what I learned initially about spiritual emergency was living with Christina, who was in and out of powerful experiences for 12 years, Kundalini awakening. And when we wrote The Stormy Surge, she said, this is the book I would have wanted. And we get a lot of positive feedback from people, but most of it is about Christina, the willingness to sort of put it out, not to, protect herself. Mm-hmm. And she didn't have an academic image to protect. And so, as it was said before, to be willing to really say something about your most intimate experiences, I think it's extremely important, because the psychiatric profession is such that we are trying to hide from each other. If we have any problems, we try to convince everybody that we have it all together, which we don't. And David before mentioned diabetes, where John Perry, who was a Jungian psychiatrist, was working with people in these spiritual emergencies without tranquilizers. And he wanted for his staff, people who have been through spiritual emergency, they considered this to be a special qualification, mm-hmm. rather than feeling disqualified the way you would be as a psychiatrist or psychologist or a nurse if you had some unusual experiences. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So the question was about my spiritual guides. I will actually tell my story, when my time comes. I would like to do the same. I don't have stories like this. I've been to many of those places, but I had the great advantage to always do it in psychedelic sessions or in meditation, where I knew that I would, to some extent, I was sort of defining my own context in which it happens, and when these things happen in the middle of everyday life, it's a whole other situation, much more of a challenge. So I had an atheistic background. I was brought up in a family where there was no religious indoctrination because of a major scandal that happened at the beginning of my parents' life when they fell in love and wanted to get married. It was in a small Czech town, and my father's family didn't have any church affiliation, and my mother's family was strictly Catholic. And they didn't want to marry them until my grandparents made a major donation to the church, and then it was possible, and they lived on Main Street, and they were able to stop traffic, and were right across the church, roll the carpets, and the guests could come, from the altar to the banquet, and my parents got so irritated that they didn't want to commit me or my brother to any religion. I say, you make your own choice when you come of age. And then from this kind of background, I went to medical school at a time when we were controlled by the Soviet Union. We had a Marxist regime, really purest possible materialism that you can get. So I'm a kind of a strange example of somebody who was brought to mysticism and spirituality through clinical and laboratory work. And it was, my first session, that was this major opening. Now, in terms of teachers, spiritual teachers, I spent a lot of time around Swami Muktananda, part of the Siddha Yoga movement. We actually, together with Muktananda, we did one earlier conference in India which was 1982, in cooperation with the Ganeshpuri ashram. So we spent a lot of time in these intensives, Siddha Yoga intensives. I have been doing for at least 25 years these joint retreats with Jack Kornfield, who's a very, very close friend. And he is my teacher as much as a kind of fellow seeker. And he considers is also a student in a way. We're both kind of students and teachers of each other. But he has an amazing way of conveying Buddhism. I've learned sort of probably more from Jack than from books, because he's also one of the few people who really walks his talk. So we do these 7 days. I just came back from one in Omega Center. It's a week where we do Vipassana meditation combined with the breath work, which is really quite an amazing combination. I've done some work in Zen. Brother David was a great teacher of mine, Brother Steindl Rast, who is Christian from the Benedictine order, but very different Christianity than the one you hear about. Christina wrote in the book Thirst for Wholeness, which was about alcoholism, addiction, and spirituality, about her experiences in the Episcopalian Church, where they had them sing, "Oh Lord, we are miserable sinners who don't deserve crumbs from your table. Oh Lord, we are sick to our core. There is no health in us." And you can't get a more powerful anti-spiritual program, because the only place where you can find the divine ultimately is inside. And if somebody tells you that you're a piece of shit, okay, and so the last place where you would look, it's out there, and you have to go through hierarchies. So this is a very different kind of Christianity than in this group. Father Beat Griffith had an ashram in India. We did some experiences with him, and he didn't see any difference between true Christianity and Hinduism. We were singing Om Namah Kristaya in his mass. So I learned a lot. They have the Hermitage of Immaculate Conception is about 10 miles from Esalen. So he came repeatedly to our month-longs. And there were people who were brought up in these fundamentalist Christian families. And then they became exposed to materialistic science and just rejected everything. And, carrying very deep conflict. And Brother David came, and within 2 hours he made them true Christians. Jesus really discovered his own divinity, and he was trying to tell people, this is true. You are sons and daughters of God, and the divine kingdom doesn't come by expectation. The divine kingdom is here, but you don't see it. Something has to happen, some kind of a transformation. When you talked about you being Buddha and Jesus, I think the problem when you are in that space, you think you're the only one. Once you sort of bring it down, you say, well, I'm Buddha, I'm Jesus, but so is everybody else. So what else? Nothing changed except my understanding. So I go and wash dishes and just know that it's Buddha incarnate. The relationships between things don't change, so you can operate perfectly in the world, but you have a different kind of a meta framework. There are some other interesting teachers, which were not spiritual teachers, but were sort of helping me to bring this whole thing together with science. And the first one was Fritjof Capra, in the book, The Tao of Physics, showing. Because we were trying to bring transpersonal psychology together with the kind of scientific worldview that I was brought up with, and it just doesn't happen. But then having a response from Fritjof and people like Paul Serac, Nick Herbert, Fred Wolf, people who are physicists. Actually, there was more enthusiastic response to transpersonal psychology from physicists than from psychologists. It's a long answer, but.